Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be going through and talking about my favorite books of 2024. For context, this year I read around 77 books, and in this video I have 7 main books that are like my best books of the year, that are also the top 5-star reads that I had for the year, and then I also have 3 honorable mentions to talk about as well. So with that intro out of the way, let's get right on into the video. I'm not going to go through this list in any particular order, like grouping genres or anything. I'm actually more so looking at these books in terms of like when I read them throughout the year. And the first book we are going to be talking about is The Little Prince by Antoine de Saint-Exupéry. This is a children's classic first published in the 1940s that, if you're not familiar with the overall story, it follows a man who has his plane crash land in the desert. And when he's there, he meets a strange little boy who then reveals himself to be the Little Prince, who is also an alien. And the Little Prince is on a journey across the cosmos for the purpose of self-discovery. He meets a lot of like quirky characters that teach him different lessons along the way. And now that he's on Earth, he is bonding with this man, striking up a friendship with him. It's a very, very cute and very like heartfelt story. This book I gave 5 stars. I have read this book previously. It's very much a nostalgic read for me. And I also just love this story so much. This actually isn't like nostalgic in terms of like a book I read when I was a kid. I first found out about it when I was in middle school, and later in high school it was one of the books that we read as part of like my French class. And I have really like fond memories from that time and that class in particular. But regardless of like the nostalgia glasses, I do just think overall it's a really good story. I do have a little bit of mixed feelings about this particular edition though. I just think that the intro is a little bit like overly academic and obtuse, which I feel like in some ways is in like direct contrast to some of the things that Saint-Exupéry says in The Little Prince. I think part of what this book makes it like a children's classic and like so universal is the fact that Saint-Exupéry treats children as just as intelligent as adults, and at the same time kind of like knows that kids can really like cut to the heart of the matter of something without needing like overly flowery language or even like any big cerebral concepts. So his writing is very like direct and no nonsense. And I think in some ways the intro just like doesn't really reflect his ethos. But that of course is just a critique of this particular edition, which I more so got as like a trophy book to add to my shelves because I have a collection of quite a few different editions of The Little Prince. And this one is really, really beautiful. This is the Penguin cloth-bound edition of it, and I am still very happy to have it on my shelves and in my collection. Okay, now let's talk about my next best book of the year, which was The Last Olympian by Rick Riordan. This is the 5th and final book in the original Heroes of Olympus series. Hard to explain what this book is about. If you're not familiar with the Heroes of Olympus series, they are following the main character, Percy Jackson, who in the first book finds out that he is a demigod, which is a child of a human and a Greek god. And he is attending a summer camp for these demigods called Camp Half-Blood. He meets a lot of friends at the camp, goes on a lot of different adventures across the country, and this one is very much the like big final battle against the overarching villain of the entire series. I feel like this book really gave me everything I would want in the last book of a series. I feel like it wrapped up all the characters' goals from the previous books so well. Definitely the thing that made me love this book most of all was the scene where they say the title of the book, The Last Olympian, and kind of like what that represents for the overall message of the series, being the importance of finding a home and being able to fight for your place in the world and to be with the people that make you feel at home. I just thought it was so beautiful. I ended up crying during that scene. So for all those reasons, I decided to give this book 5 stars, and now it is one of my favorite books of the year. Okay, now let's shift gears and talk about a nonfiction book, which I think is the only nonfiction book on this list, and that is Word Slut by Amanda Montell. This is a nonfiction book focusing on sociolinguistics, talking about different gendered patterns of speaking. I'm going to read this one line from the back cover because I think it gives a good summary. Amanda Montell, reporter and feminist linguist, deconstructs language from insults, cursing, gossip, and catcalling to grammar and pronunciation patterns to reveal the ways it has been used for centuries to keep women and other marginalized groups from power. I thought this book was really interesting. As you can see, I tabbed like the absolute crap out of it. I also highly recommend reading the audiobook version since it is narrated by Amanda Montell. And I feel like a book that's so focused on language and speech patterns really makes a lot of sense to hear it like actually spoken out loud, as opposed to just reading it as like words on a page. I just think this book was incredibly well researched. I thought all of the topics that were covered were very interesting. There were definitely a lot of things I feel like I noticed in my own speech patterns that I didn't really realize were like bigger cultural elements, or that were specifically something that's tied to my gender. And that really just like knocked me on my ass when I realized it. So for all those reasons, I really, really enjoyed this book. I had previously read another book by Amanda Montell and gave that 5 stars. And I've also read her most recent book this year and gave it 4.5 stars. So she's definitely a favorite author of mine, and I'm definitely going to check out whatever she comes out with next. Okay, now let's talk about a book that maybe is a little controversial. Not necessarily for content, but just for like general opinion on this book. And that is The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. This is the Hunger Games Book 0. It is a prequel book that focuses on President Snow back when he was a teenager living in the Capitol. It is set during the 10th Hunger Games, where as part of a new rule, students from the Capitol are going to serve as mentors for the new tributes, and Snow gets assigned the girl from District 12, who is Lucy Gray Baird. At first he thinks that Lucy Gray Baird will fall immediately, that she's not really a proper contender for the Hunger Games, but Lucy Gray has a lot of tricks up her sleeve, and the two of them kind of work together in a way that will eventually mold sort of the shape of the overall Hunger Games that we see during Katniss's time. The only thing I've written down in my notes for this book is Suzanne Collins can't miss. I was pleasantly surprised by how much I enjoyed this book. I think it is the perfect villain origin story in the way that we see Snow change throughout the story. Kind of some of the quirks and negative traits he has earlier on, just getting more and more pronounced as the book goes on, but also seeing some very clear choices and pathways that he could have taken to maybe not lead him on the path of evil that we see him in the later books. Overall, I just really, really like this book. I feel like it was a perfect addition to all the themes and stuff that's explored in the original Hunger Games trilogy. And I feel like reading this has even cemented me to be even more excited, if that's possible, for the next Hunger Games prequel book that is going to be coming out in 2025. Okay, we have 3 more books to talk about in terms of like my favorite books of the year. One of those is a fantasy romance, and then I have 2 historical romances. So I think let's do the fantasy romance first. And that one is Iron Flame by Rebecca Yarros. If you've been living under a rock and don't know what Fourth Wing is, it is a very, very popular adult fantasy romance that focuses on our main character, Violet Sorrengail, who is attending Basgiath War College to become a dragon rider. And she has a enemies to lovers relationship with her superior officer named Xaden Ryerson. This is a bit of also a controversial opinion, since I know a lot of people that really, really like Fourth Wing were a bit disappointed when Iron Flame came out. But I am kind of the reverse feeling, where I did like Fourth Wing, but I didn't think it was anything particularly special. But Iron Flame, I feel like, did everything I wanted in Fourth Wing and like turned it up to 11. Yes, I do think it is long, and yes, I do think it could have been edited down maybe a little bit in some scenes. And yes, there is a lot of fighting between Violet and Xaden, but at least for me, all of those things do not take away for my love of this book. I feel like it's the perfect blend of like action, drama, lore building, and a lot of great characters that you really grow to feel for. I actually kind of love that this book is so long, because I feel like all of the small character interactions that we see are so good and like so needed for you to kind of like grow to care and learn about all of these side characters more deeply. My favorite character overall is obviously Tairn. I love him so much. Just his like gruff dragon dad energy is giving me everything. Overall, reading this book made me so much more excited for the 3rd book that's going to be coming out in January, which I'm definitely going to try and read as close to the release date as I can. Okay, now let's talk about my 2 favorite historical romances I read this year. The first one of those is Don't Want You Like a Best Friend by Emma R. Albin. This is a sapphic historical romance set in the 1850s, and it follows our 2 main characters, Beth and Gwen, who meet during the season and become best friends, and then find out that both of their individual widowed parents previously had a like relationship with each other. So they decide to kind of like parent trap, get them back together. And during their shenanigans to try and get Beth's mom and Gwen's dad to become a couple, they also fall in love as well. I thought this book was like the perfect blend of like really cute, heartfelt, sweet, romantic moments, and then absolute pain. I feel like I really grew to feel for both the characters, and I feel like it really hit me in a special place in my heart as a lesbian. Overall, I thought that Beth and Gwen had really good chemistry. I really liked their friends to lovers trajectory, and I thought all of the additions of the side characters were really good as well. I wasn't actually as much of a fan of the second book in the series, which focuses on Beth and Gwen's cousins getting together, but this first one I was very happy I read and really, really enjoyed. Okay, now let's move on to my last favorite book of 2024, and that is The Lawrence Brown Affair by Cat Sebastian. This is the second book in the Turner series, which are historical romances set in like the 1810s. And this one follows our 2 main characters, Lawrence and Georgie. Our main character, Lawrence, is the Earl of Radnor, and he is convinced that he is mad and has just kind of like stayed locked up in his family's decrepit ancestral home to run science experiments. And his quiet, lonely life is interrupted when he meets Georgie, who is claiming to be coming on to be his new secretary. However, Georgie's not actually a secretary. He is a former con artist that's on the run when one of his former associates has it out to try and kill him. So he kind of like flees the countryside to lay low and figure out a plan so he can eventually return home. But he obviously was not expecting during this trip to fall in love with his new employer. This book is a very, very loose Beauty and the Beast retelling, and I think also is a very, very loose The Thomas Crown Affair retelling, or at the very least it borrows the same name from that movie. I was obsessed with this book when I read it. I completely like rewrote my brain chemistry. I had previously read a different Cat Sebastian book and thought it was good but wasn't like completely blown away. But in reading all of the books from the Turner series, I feel like I really, really just grew to love her as an author. This one in particular, I just loved the character dynamic between Lawrence and Georgie. A lot of that also comes from like personal connections and the fact that I feel like Lawrence is very, very strongly like autism coded. And kind of just like the way that Georgie and Lawrence interact and all the things that Georgie does to make Lawrence more comfortable and not try to like change any of his flaws, but more so just like help him adapt to the world around him is just like really beautiful to see. I feel like all of Cat Sebastian's books usually will have some element of like hurt comfort in them. Things may seem very cute or fluffy or even like campy at parts, but then one or both of the main characters will have this like inner demon that they are dealing with that then is healed by their partner. And usually during like the third act breakup, they were like pulled back by that demon. And from that, we can kind of see the duality of how much they have changed and grown from being with the person that they love, which is just so good. So yes, I highly recommend this book. I think it's so good. I'm super excited to read more of Cat Sebastian's backlist in 2025. Okay, now let's talk about my 3 honorable mentions. The first one is another historical romance, and that is A Rulebook for Restless Rogues by Jess Everly. Ignore the kind of ugly cover on this one, because the content inside I thought was really, really good. I feel like this book really kicked off my love of queer historical romance this year that were not also fantasy in some way, because that subgenre of like queer historical fantasy romance was what I read mostly before this, but I just like really love this book. I feel like I also found a like new favorite author and series in Jess Everly's works. I feel like her books overall, including this one, are very much no plot, just vibes, and are really just more like character and relationship studies between the 2 main characters. And I honestly love that. A really good character dynamic is definitely the thing that will like make or break a romance for me. But I do feel like your mileage may vary based on how much you like the main characters of her books. Okay, the next book on kind of the opposite end of the spectrum, it feels like, is Note of the Ninth by Tamsin Muir. This is the 3rd and most recent book in the Locked Tomb series, which are a set of adult sci fantasy novels. This is probably my least favorite of the Locked Tomb series, and yet it's still my honorable mention, so that just kind of goes to show you how good this series is. I think the reasons why I love this book in particular is one, not necessarily the book itself, but the short story of The Unwanted Guest, which was included in the 9th. I just feel like it's so good, it's so funny. I love the way that it's written as being like a play format, being so perfect for the scenario that's going on in that short story. And the other main reason I love this book is I think it was really good at giving us a lot of backstory and also like setup for the last book in the series. So many questions that were both answered and new ones that were now posed, that with the last book, I feel like it's going to be anyone's guess in terms of like what the hell is going to happen. Very, very impressed with pretty much all the books in the Locked Tomb series. If you have not read it, I would highly recommend checking it out. Even if you don't really normally read sci-fi, I think it's very easy to get into. And the last book on this list that I wanted to talk about today is Serpent and Dove by Shelley Mahurin. This one is almost something I can't really fully explain. I feel like this just really ignited and renewed my love for what good enemies to lovers romances can look like, as well as showing me like what an older YA, kind of borderline new adult fantasy romance can look like when it's done right. This is a YA witch x witch hunter fantasy romance, and I just like loved everything about it. I grew to really like the setting and overall like the world building elements of this book. But definitely the standout is obviously the main relationship between our romantic leads of Lou and Reed. They just have like really, really good chemistry and banter, and I feel like really grow and change throughout the story as they bond with this other person that they thought was their enemy. I've only read this first book in the trilogy, and I now have pretty high hopes for when I read the other books in this series as well. Okay, with that all said and done, those are my best books that I read in 2024. Overall, I think I had kind of a little bit of a mixed reading year. I don't know if I necessarily had as many all-time favorites as I did in 2023. I'd love to hear what your favorite books of 2024 were in the comments down below. And if you guys enjoyed this video, consider liking, commenting, or subscribing if you aren't already. Consider following me on the Storygraph if you'd like to see my reading updates in real time, as well as following me on my Bookstagram, which is linked in the description. And that is going to be it for me today. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye!